Hello. Welcome to this celebration of our friend Don. We're very grateful to everyone here at the center and for all the people watching on the live stream, including members of Don's family. We extend our sympathies to his mom, Linda, and his sisters, Susan and Lori. Don was a smart and kind guy. He had a great sense of humor, and we're all fortunate that we're here on the earth at the same time as him. He was passionate about his work, publishing, advocating for LGBTQ+ and diverse voices, and expanding literary offerings beyond the few queer works that find their way into the mainstream. It's impossible to pay tribute to Don in an afternoon, but today we'll hear from some of Don's close friends, writers he worked with, people he was colleagues with, and we'll also hear some excerpts from some of the books he published. Now I'd like to turn it over to Don's close friend, Paul Chamberlain. We're clapping at a funeral?
5 minutes and 43 years. 5 minutes is what I have been given to create an aperture you might peer through to see Don as I have seen him for 43 years. 5 minutes to tell you he was the son who spoke to his mother every day and made sure her groceries were delivered from 2,500 miles away. 5 minutes to tell you that he was the beloved brother to Lori and Susan, uncle to Elizabeth, and godfather to Ismara. 5 minutes to tell you that this man was the most hilarious and mischievous stack of kindness and brilliance any of us ever had the pleasure of knowing. Donald Edward Weise was my first editor and my best audience. We met and became immediate best friends in 1983 while on the staff of the Knight's Banner, the newspaper of record for a Royal High School. I wrote a puckish little bi-weekly satire column which was always accompanied by a cartoon drawn by Don. Our collaboration consistently drew raves from the teachers and administrators, and that's all we cared about because that was our audience. We had adventures during the hot summers in San Gabriel Valley. We snuck onto the back lot at Universal Studios and roamed sound stages until we were questioned by security guards. We told them we were extras on Simon & Simon. We were able to escape. We used to go through Lucille Ball's trash looking for junk mail with her name on it. We went to the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences tribute for Hitchcock in '84 and still howled years later at how creeped out we were when Anthony Perkins fiendishly drawled, "Hello, boys," when we asked for his autograph. And we were very proud that we got yelled at by Billy Wilder after bum rushing him at an AFI tribute for Fred Zinnemann. Don nicknamed me Bilko, after the lovable silver-tongued scheming character played by Phil Silvers in the 1950s. Donald was my best audience, and I was fearless in whatever hijinks we were about to pull off and that were going to make him laugh. Eventually, the nickname became interchangeable between us, and he became Bilko to me as well. But beneath all that mischief, and maybe inside of it, was the thing that made Don, his tenderness. After high school, Don and I worked as radiology orderlies at Arcadia Methodist, the very hospital where we were both born. It was there that his humanity and compassion blossomed. The older ladies we transported loved him and would request him by name. It was also there that we saw things that no 19 or 20-year-olds should see. Emergency rooms show you someone's worst day, not another work day. Don never forgot that, especially when we began to see young men being cared for behind plastic sheets and masks. With hushed tones from the nurses, we knew. As an English lit major at UCLA, the doe-eyed, sweet young man from Temple City came out, buzzed his hair, and became a banner-carrying member of the LA ACT UP branch in league with fiery activists throwing eggs at Cardinal Mahoney on the steps of the LA Archdiocese, denouncing the dismissal and derision of the community during the AIDS crisis. His activism was now fully engaged. His employment and advocacy work at the LA LGBTQ Center is where he met Dale, the love of his life, that soon led to moving to the Bay Area, where Don formed a friendship and collaborated with David Hilliard and the surviving Black Panthers. He had profound commitment to equality across race, gender, and sexuality. not as an abstract principle, but as something lived through his friendships, his work, and his editorial partnership with his dear college friend and colleague, Devin Carbato. On weekends, he and Dale started a literacy program at an Oakland elementary school in a neighborhood many people had written off. Every Saturday, they gave their time to children and grateful parents of that community. Yeah, Don did that too. I think I'm roughly at about 4 minutes, and I feel I have fallen so short of sharing with you just how wonderful my best friend was. He was a quiet force of nature and a raconteur in the truest sense. Whether he was swanning around with Ben Gazzara and his wife, watching the Clinton impeachment hearings with Gore Vidal and Ravello, or relishing his friendship with Edmund White, Don somehow found his way into extraordinary rooms. And then even more extraordinarily, he made those rooms warmer, funnier, and more human just by being there. There was no one else I would have had stand next to me when I got married 23 years ago. He was my best man. He was my brother. And I have yet to remove his number from my speed dial. And I don't think I will. Okay, well, I think I'm over my time. And with that said, what I wouldn't give to have 5 more minutes with Poco. Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Patrick Ryan.
Don Weise was a striking person to first meet. Part of it was his hair. As far as I know, Don was born with gray hair. He had it when we met, 22 years ago, and it made him seem older than me, even though I was a year older than him. He was also tall and broad-shouldered and had this air of sophistication. He looked like a movie studio executive from the 1930s, the one everybody wanted to please. When I first met him, he was at Carroll and Graph, and he already had the reputation for being an editor who, if he believed in your manuscript, would go out on a limb to convince his bosses that it was worth publishing. But the two things that struck me the most when I first met Don were his voice, which had a soft, I'm really proud of this description, and I'm really bummed that I'm kind of screwing up the delivery of it. His voice, which had a soft upward scrape to it, and the steady set of his eyes. Don had the most consistent eyes of anyone I've ever known. They never looked tired or worried or angry or happy. They were always just slightly pinched, a perfect mix of guardedness and gentleness and guile. We met at a party at Edmund White and Michael Carroll's apartment. The party was being thrown for a famous visiting writer who was staying with them. Don and I had just been introduced by Michael, and we'd been talking about books and writers for maybe an hour in the guest room where the famous visiting writer was staying, and his suitcase lay open. And when I got done telling Don a story about how that famous visiting writer had dissed me 10 years before, Don suggested we throw the guy's clothes out the window, which was right there open with no screen. I was still getting to know him when I talked him out of doing that. He threw a chicken bone into the guy's suitcase instead. It was the first glimpse I had into Don's particular brand of loyalty, and it was the start of a friendship that became one of the greatest of my life. Every single day now, several times a day, I think of something I want to tell Don or share with him. I miss the only friend I ever had who called me, and a lot of other people, kid. I miss the friend who would never tire of rewatching Jaws or Ordinary People, and who never tired of recasting Jaws and Ordinary People with his close circle of friends, in every key role, including the shark. I miss the friend who, if he ever introduced me to someone at an event, would lean into them and say, "Don't look at his hairpiece." I miss the friend who texted me, "Happy birthday, you're now as old as Alec Guinness in Star Wars." And who texted me out of the blue one day, "I'd like to remake Witness from the point of view of an S&M power bottom who teaches at CUNY." See, I know Don would hate for this to be a sad gathering, and there's so many happy, hilarious, one-of-a-kind only Don moments to remember. The first year that I knew him, he published the actor Ben Gazzara's memoir. Gazzara was 75, legendary tough guy. Publishing the memoir resulted in Don's getting invited to dinner at Ben and Elke's Upper East Side apartment. Don was really excited, but he didn't want to go alone. So he asked me if I would go with him because Elke, he said, was a larger-than-life figure and Ben could be very intense. Of course, I said yes. We get there and it's just the four of us, and the only liquid served in that apartment over the course of the evening was vodka. By the time we finish dessert, we're smashed. Elke gets up, puts on music, says she wants to dance. She starts swaying around the living room. Who wants to dance with me? She looks at Gazzara, and he looks slightly annoyed and says, "Hell no." She looks at Don, and Don puts his hand on my shoulder. Oh, this hasn't happened to me in a while. Puts his hand on my shoulder and says, "This kid is like Fred Astaire. He's your man." No, come on, do it, kid. Don't be shy, go crazy. Elke starts begging me to dance. I would rather eat my foot, but she pulls me by my arm and I stand, and the two of us start dancing around in the Gazzara's living room while Gazzara and Don watch us. And Elke, it turns out, doesn't want to just dance. Elke wants to dirty dance. She's pulling me against her, and I'm trying to figure out how to drop through the floor, and we are front to front grinding. When I look over at the table, I see Gazzara, and his arms are folded, and he's looking at me like this. I look at Don, and Don looks at Gazzara, and Don goes, and Elke keeps dancing. And at one point, Gazzara, watching us like a hawk, leans his head over, and he says, "He's gay, right?" And Don says, "You never know." When I did my deep text dive into preparing something for today, I found so many things that only he would have said, observations only he would have made. I also found one text from last year, and it said, late last year, I'm sorry, this was like late December. "Can we please promise each other that whoever dies first, the other one will perform Robert Shaw's entire Indianapolis speech from Jaws at the memorial?" To which I replied, "Okay." I know Don would be relieved that I'm not going to do it. I can hear him saying, "Don't do it, kid." And I won't do it, Don, but it's very tempting. Now we'll hear from Michael Zam.
Don really championed the work of my late partner, Bob Smith, and this was the first novel Bob got to write, and Don was really crucial for making it happen. The novel's called Selfish and Perverse, and in it, it's about a young writer's assistant at a variety show on television, and the guest that week is a handsome young man, and he finds himself flirting with him over geeky nature things, and hoping that it will be a date. He gets to take the guy, Roy, to where he thinks something will happen, and that's La Brea Tar Pits. So this is where it starts. So we were the last people to leave the museum at closing time. "Do you smell tar?" Roy asked when we walked outside, or should I say asphalt. Inside the museum, we had read that the pits were actually filled with asphalt, the lowest form of crude oil. It was technically incorrect to call them tar pits because tar was a man-made substance. I said I could smell it too. The sky was dark gray and it looked like rain. A gust of wind rattled a trash can as we strolled into the park. The large head of a mastodon came into view. You know, in this light, it looks almost real, Roy observed. I wish we could get closer. All the tar pits were enclosed by chain link fences. They reminded me of a derelict motel pool. I leaned against the gate on the fence and happened to cause the lock to snap open with a loud click. Someone didn't do their job today. We looked at each other, then looked around the park. No one was nearby, so we decided to step inside and cautiously made our way to the pool. Be careful, the ground's soft here, Roy warned as he stepped toward the tar pit. I suddenly recognized the strong, aromatic smell of black, thick sage from hiking in the Santa Monica Mountains. I leaned forward to inhale the bush closest to me. You've got to smell this, Roy. As I reached out, though, my foot slipped on a patch of mud and my sneaker plunged into the warm, viscous liquid. I heard a rustling coming from the tops of the trees and the sound of rain hitting the leaves. The big, cold drops splattered my head and shoulders, and a downpour immediately followed. I tried to pull my foot out of there, but there was an ominous sucking sound as the tar gripped my foot with antediluvian force. As I struggled to remove my leg, I lost my balance, my misstep producing an ominous slurp, followed by the aroma of tar. Roy, I yelled. It had to be hundreds of years since the last frightened mammal had cried out from a tar pit. Oh my God, don't move, Roy shouted, his alarmed face registering my predicament. Are you sinking? Yes, I said, thinking that being swallowed by a parking lot was a particularly cruel way for a Southern Californian to die. Being entombed in a tar pit would be like being stuck in traffic for eternity. I began feeling truly terrified. Roy, what should I do? Roy started feeling around his pockets, realizing he'd left his cell phone back in his hotel room. Do you have your cell phone? Roy, call 911. I was able to just maneuver my phone from my jacket pocket, and while punching in the numbers, I realized I might be arrested for trespassing, but the gurgling sound around my knees reassured me that spending a night in jail would be preferable to dying in a tar pit. Hello, 911. Hi, I'm sinking in La Brea tar pits. No, this isn't a joke. I'm really stuck and I'm really sinking. I know I'm not supposed to be here. Is this being taped? It doesn't matter. I'm right behind the museum and yes, well, there's this big mastodon. No, don't hang up. It's fake. It's part of the exhibit. Listen, I really need help. I called out to Roy. Okay, she's alerting the fire department. Outside the fence, a man was talking loudly into his cell phone and I saw people starting to gather. Roy, I said, you have to go. No, he said, starting to climb a tree. The sound of fire trucks could be heard approaching. Get down, you can't be seen here. Though I hoped more than anything he would stay, I pleaded for him to go. I heard a helicopter circling above us. Looking up, I'd expected to see a police chopper, but my heart sank when I recognized the familiar logo of the Channel 7 news team. I was tempted to ask Roy to throw his coat over my head, but I didn't, a decision I came to deeply regret later. Meanwhile, the Channel 4 news team arrived behind me, and I could see a blonde-haired woman reporter talking into a mic. She turned to me and asked my name. I'm a little busy right now. Was this a suicide? Is this a suicide attempt, she asked. Oh yeah, I wanted to take my time, I answered. The fireman arrived, interrupting our interview. He was in his late 30s, had black jet hair and a mustache, broad shoulders, and looked like he should be Mr. January on a firefighter calendar. He told me not to worry, then threw a frisbee to me, which was attached to a rescue harness. Embarrassingly, I dropped it twice before finally catching it. Roy's head looked like a pincushion as reporters thrust mics into his face. By now, there were 4 news stations and several police officers setting up a line with a yellow barrier tape to keep back the large crowd. Then my cell phone rang, playing the theme from Shaft. The crowd, including Roy, started to laugh until I punched the button and said, "Hello?" It was my friend Wendy, who's based on the comic Judy Gold. How the fuck did you get stuck in La Brea tar pits? Wait, you're watching me? Yes, you're on all the local news channels. And wait, yep, nationally on CNN. And MSNBC has a commercial. Nope, they're cutting to breaking news, and there you are. Wave to me. You're being mean, but I waved anyway. At that point, a further loss of dignity seemed impossible. Then she told me, they're interviewing Roy. He looks so handsome, and he only says nice things about you. You can't let him go. I looked over at Roy, and our eyes met. I'm not going anywhere, Roy shouted, and I made a bad joke. You're stuck with me. So, thanks. And now, sorry, Charles Rice goes on.
It's okay, I was going to introduce myself. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. Memorials are wild and they're necessary. It's a way to celebrate a person's life and also to remember them. George Eliot, Marianne Evans wrote, "Our dead are never dead to us until we have forgotten them." That comes from a Mexican concept of the final death, right? The first one is the physical one, and the final one is when one is forgotten. So today we remember Don Weise. When I heard of Don's passing from the amazing Chris Shirley, I was in Mexico and he said, "I just wanted you to know before it came out." And I'm glad he did, because the next day or so, social media was flooded with beautiful testimonies, anecdotes, and memories of Don, and gratitude. Of course, lots of gratitude. I have immense gratitude because the way in which he changed my life, right? So if you can imagine, many of us, Don changed our lives. So I'm standing here, but if you can imagine, like hundreds and hundreds of writers here standing with me who can say that Don changed their lives. So I have immense gratitude because the way he changed my life was turning me from an aspiring writer to a published novelist by publishing my debut novel, Chulito. The book has been called groundbreaking and has won awards, but it was Don who believed in it, Don who worked with me to get it to a final edit, and Don who unleashed it into the world. So again, as you hear me speaking, standing here, imagine the hundreds of lives Don transformed. And there's writers in the rooms that have been impacted or have had their work by Don. Can you just raise your hand? Right, so if you look around, you don't have to imagine we're here. My meetings with Don were always thoughtful, and he knew the book and the character so well that sometimes when he was speaking to me, it was as if he had written the book himself. We had our challenges, right? There was a chapter that he flat out said, "Take it out." And I was like, "Don, you just don't understand. This is he would listen, take it out. This went on for a bit, and then finally he said, "All right, Charles, do this. Read the chapter before and the chapter after it without the book and tell me what you think of the pacing." And I was like, that mother, he was right. It worked. So we took the chapter out. But there were also like magical moments and beautiful moments. And one, he said to me, at this section of the book, you're letting your character off too easy. The protagonist is just, the stakes are higher. It needs something. And I said, like, what? What does it need? He goes, "You're the writer. You figured it out." So then I did. I wrote a scene, and it was one that physically wore me out. And I lay down at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It was sunny. I woke up. It was like night. But I got up, I edited it, and sent it to him. He said that was it. But he had that way of being able to give direction, but didn't tell me exactly what to do, but knew how to push me in the right direction. So in addition to being my publisher, Don also became a colleague and a friend. He, at the time, was with the Lambda Literary Foundation, and I run a theater in the Bronx. And so the Lammy Awards had a year that was a little turbulent. And he says, "Well, I have a writer who I just signed who runs a theater. Maybe he can tell us something about how to do this award show." So he looped me in. And that's another aspect. So we weren't just writers. You become friends. You become part of the community, of the world, the literary world that he was a part of. So he brought me into that fold as well. So we know he was a Black lit scholar, and he championed many writers, but many Black and writers of color, and so I'm glad to be one of them. Today, I was ready to post on social media. I wasn't ready back then, and I posted a picture of Don with me and Sam Delaney and Ed White that was right in this building during one of the Rainbow Book Fairs. And that was in 2012. And so at first, I was like, it was my first book. I wanted to be everywhere. And he was like, he had just started Magnus, and he says, I don't want to do that. He said that we have to bring books there. And I said, I'll do it. I'll man the table. But then he got into it. So then we were here, and he had Sam and Edmund White come, and we took a picture together. And at first I was like, I was setting it all up, and so we're there, and he says, no, you guys take the picture, you're the writers. And I said, no, Don, come into it. And he came into the picture. And so when I looked at that picture today, I feel how incomplete it would have been if he wasn't in it. And so now, in a sense, the publishing world, the queer publishing world, is incomplete without him in it. So the amazing poet Melvin Dixon, in his final speech at the Outright Festival in 1992, when he was dying or close to dying of AIDS, repeated a phrase, "I'll be somewhere listening for my name." So Don, I know you're listening. So on the count of 3, I want you to join me in saying his name. 1, 2, 3. Don Weise. Thank you, Don. May you rest in peace, in power, and in pleasure. Next, we have William Johnson.
Thank you, Charles, for that. Actually, Don also changed the trajectory of my life. Actually, I first met Don in August 20th, 2009 at Edmund White's and Michael Carroll's party, similar to you, Patrick. I remember those parties because there was a lot of gossip and there was hoagies. So that's what I remember about those parties. At the time, I was working in HIV/AIDS services in Hell's Kitchen. Like many people of my generation, AIDS had redirected the course of my life. I had earned a degree in creative writing, but activism and the urgency of the epidemic had pulled me to a different path. Literature had become something I loved, but I could never imagine it was something that could shape my career. But that itch never went away. Out of a mixture of frustration, ambition, and a little arrogance, I started a small literary magazine with the funds from my job. And Edmund invited me to his party to talk about it in more detail. And that is where I met Don. We spent a lot of time talking. We talked about books, art, ethics, publishing, queer writers, and the strange passion that often turns into literary and cultural output. Don had an extraordinary gift for conversation. The project I was working on was tiny, with tons of typos. I had no real reputation, no track record, no credentials that would have impressed anyone, but Don saw something. Over the next couple of months, we continued to talk, and he opened his Rolodex for me. But Don's Rolodex was more than a collection of names. It was a map of years of friendship, collaborations, literary histories, and communities. He introduced me to people. He connected me to opportunities. He vouched for me. More importantly, he trusted my judgment simply through our deep conversations. He trusted my mind over any physical evidence that he should, and for that, I am thankful. Eventually, when a position opened up at Lambda Literary, Don encouraged me to pursue it. That recommendation changed my life. It led to a career in the literary arts that has now spanned decades. As I reflected on Don's life these past weeks, I'm returning to that quality. We often talk about Don's accomplishments as an editor, a publisher, an advocate, and a champion of LGBTQ culture. Those accomplishments are enormous. They change lives and help shape a literary culture that many of us take for granted. But I experienced firsthand something more intimate. Don had an eye for talent, but more than that, he had an eye for possibility. He could look at someone who was still becoming themselves and see who they might be one day. That's a rare gift. Many people are willing to celebrate success after it arrives. But Don did something different. He saw what could be and encouraged it. There are many writers, editors, activists, and readers whose lives are different because Don took them seriously, because he made a phone call, because he offered encouragement, because he opened a door. We often measure a life by what a person created. Don created books, institutions, friendships, and communities. But his legacy to me is that he helped me and others become their best selves. I am one of those people. For that trust, for that generosity, and for that faith in me before I fully learned to have that faith in myself, I will always be grateful. So thank you, Don. Now I'd like to call to the stage Chris Shirley.
Thank you, William. So like Charles and a few other faces here, I met Don while I was shopping around my debut novel. I'm sure many here have the same experience with Don. Eventually, Don did publish Playing by the Book, but the most enduring thing to come out of our relationship was not a book. It was friendship and a whole community of writers, many of you here today. So through Don, I became part of a group that included Michael Carroll, Patrick Ryan, David McConnell, Bob Smith, and of course, Don. We called ourselves Author Secret Society, or ASS, because no group of writers can resist a bad acronym. We met every Monday night for years at Barracuda. Tuesday mornings were often not so great, but Monday nights were awesome. So around that same time, I worked with Don on his effort to acquire Allison Books. So it unfortunately failed, but it gave me a front row seat to something I hadn't fully understood before, and that is how difficult it is to keep books alive in this world. There were endless spreadsheets, business plan drafts, and conversations about how to preserve LGBTQ voices and stories. But you know what struck me most about Don was that he wasn't entering this like he was acquiring a company. He was entering this like he was preserving a literary home for LGBTQ writers. That's what he kept coming back to. So for Don, preserving our voices and our ideas mattered deeply. We spent a lot of time together during those months, and Don shared many stories, including that his very first acquisition as an editor was a national best-selling collection of essays by Gore Vidal. It was a connection he remained proud of throughout his entire career, and obviously so. So it feels fitting that my reading comes from this very book, Sexually Speaking, but not from Vidal himself. I'm going to read from Don's introduction to the interview section of Sexually Speaking, the book that brought them together. This is from Don's introduction. When New York Times journalist Andrew Solomon met Gore Vidal in 1995 for what was expected to be the author's final print interview in English, Mr. Solomon depicted his host's Italian home in impressive detail. White stucco anchored miraculously into the sheer face of the cliff, 12 acres of vertical stone and terrace gardens, a pool that commands the same panorama as the house, an extra balcony for cocktails just along the rock face. Mr. Vidal's memoir had just been published, and in the words of the Times reporter, Vidal is on stage for the moment, not for his accomplishments, but for who and how he was. Like Mr. Solomon before me, I was received at the author's much praised residence. While Mr. Solomon successfully evoked the setting of my visit, we part company on our interpretations. For Gore Vidal's life, who and how he was must rank as one among many distinguished accomplishments in a career full of distinguished accomplishments, particularly where topics of sexuality and gender are involved. Indeed, he has been on stage for over half a century, and it is precisely the voice of who and how he was that resonates most clearly in matters of sex. So that's the beginning of the introduction. I'll skip to the end. And it was because near the end, Don recounts an exchange that feels especially relevant today, an exchange with Mr. Vidal. In concluding our meeting, I assured Mr. Vidal that he would have an opportunity to review this book's manuscript before going to press. Dates are important, he said, referring to his request that each essay appear with the date of publication. Sometimes you're ahead of the pack, and sometimes you're going against it. Sometimes you're saying what was then the unsayable, and now it's said by everybody. When things are said is all important. Would that the sexual politics advocated by Mr. Vidal in the following interviews be at last sayable by everybody. Don Weise, San Francisco, March 1999. So looking back now, it's clear that Don discovered his purpose in life very early, and that purpose was to help writers say what was once unsayable, and he made sure those voices found a home. Next, we'll hear from Linda Villarosa.
Hello, I'm glad to be in the room with all of you. I met Don in 2006. He was part of a group called the All Girl Action Committee, an organization dedicated to celebrating lesbian literature and culture and for connecting queer women in publishing. That year, in April, was the first event, and it was this really fun party celebrating the author Sarah Waters. I'll just circle back to the name, All Girl Action Committee. Don was clearly one of the girls. In fact, his title on the invite was editor and honorary lesbian. I went back through 20 years of emails to prepare for this and was not surprised to see a number of words jump out and phrases along with honorary lesbian, including jumbo martini, bag of tricks, can we scam to get into that dinner, Rolodex, fax, and cute girl bartender, who I think was probably at the party, the all-girl party. Many of those emails involved schemes we had come up with to support Black queer authors and lesbian writers, and some of them we even accomplished between all the lunches, parties, dinners, and drinks. Don and I would connect most intensely throughout the years over our separate relationships with Elin Harris, the queer Black novelist who had a string of bestsellers in the 90s and early 2000s. I take credit for discovering Lynn, who showed up at my hotel room, I was an editor at Essence magazine, with his manuscript for Invisible Life that he pulled out of his trunk. He just bushed me, like just came into the hotel room, and I ended up championing Elin and publishing an essay that he had written from Invisible Life in Essence, and that it led to his first book deal. Don met Lynn a few years later than I did in 1997. Don basically went to San Francisco to Marcus Books to talk Elin into giving a blurb for Melvin Dixon's reissue of Vanishing Rooms. Don would cement his working relationship with Lynn about a decade later when he signed him to edit and write the intro to the revelatory Freedom in This Village, an anthology of Black gay men's writing for Carolyn Graff. Don also sometimes served as Lynn's outside editor. After Lynn passed away in 2009, Don and I teamed up to launch the Elin Harris Award for Excellence in Black LGBT Short Fiction, given to a young queer Black writer. It took months, maybe even years, of jumbo martinis, dinners, lunches, begging, cajoling to get that off the ground, but we did it in 2013. Naomi Jackson would be the first person to win the award. That prize didn't last, though our friendship did. But damn it, that press release with both of our names on it remains online today. What I remember most with so much gratitude was Don's belief in indie publishing and his championing of the process and the people. About a decade ago, my family, my mom, my sister, and I decided to launch a really small independent publishing company. And again, we went to Don's for advice to see how we could get this little tiny publishing company for Black women off the ground. He gave us much more than that, including a series of dinners, drinks, lunches, this time with me, my mother, and my 80-something-year-old mother. He was patient, kind, generous, and supportive to us. We did launch the publishing company, Villa Rosa Media. We published this book, The Wind is Spirit, which is an anthology of writing. It won the 2017 Lambda Literary Award, and Don was one of the first people I thanked, my mother thanked, and my sister thanked, and I remain grateful to him. Thank you. Eddie, close us out.
Thanks again for coming today, and thank you to everyone who joined us on the live stream. I hope this afternoon's reminded us all of not only what Don accomplished, but of how many lives he touched as a publisher, editor, mentor, and friend. Thanks to Don, friends and colleagues who put this together. It was truly a labor of love. And to honor Don's memory, donations may be made in his name to Lambda Literary, the Publishing Triangle, PEN America, or a charity of your choice. We have the room till 7, so please enjoy us for a bite to eat, a drink. There's a cocktail today named the Don, and let's have some more memories of him. Thank you.